There are some things you see coming like a storm building on the horizon, and there are others that hit you like a backdraft when you open the wrong door. For me, the first real crack in the glass came one Tuesday morning when I saw the way she texted someone with her back to me. Phone tilted just out of view like it had a secret to protect and a partner in crime helping keep it locked away. It had been a long week of overtime and honey-do lists, but I'd gotten used to that rhythm. The grind of a man doing his best to provide for the woman he loved, even if the appreciation had faded like the polish on our wedding china, sitting unused since our 5th anniversary. And that was 3 years ago now. She had smiled less lately. Not in the tired way that comes from real-life exhaustion, but in that absent way that says someone else is occupying the heart space you used to own. And when I asked her if everything was all right, she gave me that patented reassurance. The one that sounds like truth but tastes like tinfoil in your mouth. I was no detective, no spy, no private investigator with a pen camera and a trench coat. But I knew enough about silence to know when it was weaponized and enough about loyalty to know when it was being traded for something more exciting than homemade casseroles and shared laundry baskets. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Not to feed the wolf of paranoia without at least checking the door was actually unlocked. So I watched, I listened, I made mental notes like a man quietly building a case against the thing he feared most. And I waited. It was on a Thursday evening, the kind that should have ended with wine and a movie, that I noticed the missed calls on her phone. Not from work, not from friends, but from a number that had no name and far too many attempts to be casual. When I asked about it, she laughed and said it was spam. The kind that keeps forgetting it already got blocked. That night, I didn't sleep much. And it wasn't the caffeine or the creaking pipes. It was the feeling that something was shifting beneath me like a foundation settling or maybe cracking. I couldn't tell yet which one it was, but I knew I had to find out. Not because I wanted to catch her, not because I needed to be right, but because the man I saw in the mirror every morning deserved to know if the life he'd spent building brick by loyal brick was being quietly dismantled by someone he trusted to hold the blueprint. And so began the slow, methodical process of pulling the thread, watching what came unraveled. Because some secrets don't stay hidden forever. Some truths want to be found, even if they leave scars when they surface. There's a difference between a man guessing and a man knowing. That line gets crossed the moment hope is replaced by evidence. For me, it came on a Saturday when she said she had to run errands that would take all afternoon but left the house dressed like she was heading to a magazine shoot, not the dry cleaner and grocery store. I waited exactly 40 minutes before I followed. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I no longer trusted the story she was selling. And trust me, I had bought that narrative wholesale for years. The one where love was enough, where effort earned you loyalty, and vows meant permanence, not convenience. I didn't trail her like some jealous teenager or a man on the edge of a breakdown. I drove slow with the windows cracked and the kind of focus that comes when your heart knows it's about to get hit, but your mind is still hoping for a near miss. She didn't go to the bank or the pharmacy or the boutique she told me needed a return made. She went to a cafe 2 towns over where nobody would recognize her unless they were looking. And she didn't sit alone either. She sat with him, a man I'd never seen before but instantly hated. Not because of his face, but because of hers. When she looked at him the way she used to look at me, before routine dulled the shine and years wore the edges smooth. And now I knew I wasn't paranoid. I was just the last one to see it. They didn't touch much, but it was there. The comfort, the familiarity, the silent language of 2 people who thought they'd covered their tracks but forgot that lies leave footprints. And I had just started following them. I didn't confront her that day because I wanted more than a reaction. I wanted the truth. And I knew the truth doesn't speak when it's cornered. It hides and lashes out and plays victim. And I'd seen enough of those games played by others to know I wouldn't win if I walked in swinging. So I took pictures. Not because I needed proof for anyone else, but because I needed something to anchor me when she came home that night smiling like she hadn't just set fire to the home we'd built together, brick by carefully laid brick. She asked me how my day was and I told her it was quiet, that I spent most of it cleaning the garage, which wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. And she kissed my cheek like everything was normal, not realizing she was kissing the man who knew. That night, I sat in the dark and stared at those photos. Not out of masochism, but to let it sink in, to let the reality take shape so I wouldn't second-guess myself later when it came time to do what needed to be done. Because this wasn't just a marriage anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was about to start my investigation. It's one thing to suspect betrayal and another thing entirely to live with it like an uninvited guest, sleeping on your couch and eating your peace. I'll tell you, nothing makes a man feel more invisible than sharing a dinner table with someone who's planning her next lie while complimenting your meatloaf. I became an expert in pretending after that Saturday, watching her go about her day like she wasn't living two lives under one roof. And I let her because sometimes patience is sharper than confrontation, and I needed her to think she was still in control. She started coming home later, sometimes with excuses so thin you could read through them without squinting. Things like the printer broke at work, or she bumped into an old friend, or traffic was worse than usual, even when the roads were dry and the calendar was clear. I nodded every time like a fool with a mouth full of doubt. I started looking through the digital trail, not because I wanted to snoop, but because I already knew. Now I needed confirmation, not from her lips, which could lie with practiced grace, but from the facts, which didn't care about her version of events. It didn't take long. Receipts from restaurants we never went to. Calls made at strange hours to a number saved under a fake name. A hotel charge slipped into a pile of business expenses like it belonged there. All of it sitting right under our roof, hiding in plain sight like rot beneath fresh paint. I stared at the evidence with a strange calm, not the rage I expected, but the kind of silence that settles in before a thunderstorm, when the birds stop singing and the sky forgets how to breathe. Because in that silence, I wasn't just the betrayed husband anymore. I was a man with a plan. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. That wasn't the goal. The goal was clarity because you can't rebuild a life on cracked ground. And I wanted to know exactly how deep the fault line ran and who else might be standing on it without realizing the floor was about to collapse. So I started asking soft questions, careful questions about her day, her coworkers, and her plans, and watched her eyes each time because eyes are traitors when the mouth is lying. And hers were telling a different story every single night. And one night, when she said she had a girls' night with her friend Rachel, I smiled and said, "Have fun," even though I had already spoken to Rachel that afternoon. And Rachel was in Colorado visiting her sister and had no idea my wife was using her name as a hall pass. She came home smelling like smoke and laughter, wearing heels she hadn't worn in years, and said the bar was fun and the drinks were overpriced. I told her that sounded lovely, even though I knew exactly which hotel she'd been to because I was parked across the street when she checked in. The mask she wore was beginning to crack, not from guilt but from the weight of so many stacked lies, trying to hold each other up like cards in a house built by someone who didn't believe in the wind. And I was the wind. I just hadn't blown yet. The thing about catching someone in a lie is once you've seen behind the curtain, you can never unsee the strings. No matter how well they perform, the magic is gone, and now you're just watching a person pull doves from their sleeve and wondering where they buried the truth. I stopped listening to what she said and started listening to what she didn't say because silence leaves fingerprints, and hers were all over the empty spaces between her excuses. And every time she looked at me with those eyes that used to hold affection, now hollowed by disinterest, I saw a woman rehearsing lines from a script she no longer cared to memorize. I began to shift my routine in small invisible ways, rising earlier, staying out later, asking fewer questions, all the while documenting everything, from the smell of cologne that wasn't mine to the way she smiled when she thought I wasn't looking. And each note became a brick in a wall I was building to protect myself from what was coming. She started noticing the change, or maybe just the absence of attention. And suddenly the woman who had vanished into late nights and unexplained weekends was asking if we could spend more time together. And I said yes with the same smile I gave the mechanic when he told me my brakes were fine, even though I could feel them slipping. She made my favorite meal one evening with candles and music and that dress I hadn't seen in over a year, and I played along because sometimes you have to let the show go on a little longer just to see how the story ends. That night, when she reached for me like a woman rediscovering love, I held her like a man memorizing the feel of something he no longer trusted. And I wondered if she noticed that my arms were a little stiffer and my kiss a little colder, or if she was too wrapped in her own performance to care. I went to the bank the next morning and opened a separate account. Not because I was leaving just yet, but because it's easier to stand when you're not holding everything in one hand. And I wasn't about to let her drop me and take the floor too. I changed the passwords on my email and set up backups for every photo, every message, every screen capture I'd saved. And I didn't do it out of malice. I did it because I'd spent years being the man who trusted, and now I needed to be the man who planned. The man she thought would never find out had found out. And the man she thought would collapse was standing a little taller every day. Because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about control. And I was starting to take mine back. There's a moment in every game when the player holding all the cards realizes he doesn't have to play them yet. And that moment came for me one morning when she kissed my cheek and said she had to leave early for a work retreat. Even though her suitcase had no files, no laptop, and no hint of a woman heading to anything remotely professional. I walked her to the car, carrying her bag like the devoted husband she still believed I was. And as she pulled out of the driveway, I waved goodbye and smiled just wide enough for her to think I was still asleep inside this dream she had crafted for us both to suffocate in. But she didn't know I already had the address from the hotel confirmation email she accidentally left open 2 weeks ago. And she definitely didn't know I had installed a little device beneath her dashboard that told me everywhere she went in real time. By the time she reached the hotel, I was already halfway through my backup plan. A series of folders, neatly labeled and stored in the cloud, complete with timelines, receipts, surveillance footage, and screenshots of messages she didn't realize could be recovered, even after she deleted them. I didn't need to confront her yet. I just needed to know how far she was willing to go, how deep the performance ran, and whether she had enough shame left to even pretend it was still about business and not the man she met in secret room 204 with the same urgency she used to save for me. The front desk clerk at the hotel didn't even blink when I walked in wearing my old college hoodie and asked if my wife had checked in yet. And when he confirmed the room number, I thanked him like it was the most normal thing in the world to be meeting your spouse on a weekday morning at a mid-range hotel. I didn't go to the room. I didn't need to. Instead, I left a handwritten note for her at the front desk. Just a simple sentence that read, "I hope he's worth it," and signed it with my name. Then I left before the elevator could deliver the explosion I just lit the fuse for. I went home and made coffee and sat in the quiet house we used to call ours and realized that for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt calm. Because the moment she saw that note, her game would change. Now I was no longer the man in the dark. Now I was the variable she didn't control. She didn't come home that night. She didn't call either. Just a text around midnight that said, "We need to talk," followed by silence so loud it practically screamed. And I let it sit there unanswered, like the dozens of lies she'd piled on top of our life. And I went to bed knowing the next move was finally mine. And I planned to make it count. Because this wasn't just about catching her anymore. It was about making sure she knew that the man she underestimated had turned into something she never saw coming. There's a silence that follows the truth, one that feels heavier than any scream. And when I woke the next morning to find her standing in the kitchen, still wearing the clothes from the night before, I knew we had finally crossed that line where pretending was no longer an option. She didn't speak at first, just watched me pour my coffee like she was trying to remember how to start a conversation with the man she'd thought would never put the pieces together. And when she finally did open her mouth, the only thing she said was, "Can we talk?" I nodded because this was the moment I had prepared for. Not with fists or fury, but with quiet resolve and the kind of stillness that comes from knowing you've already won. You just haven't said the words out loud yet. She sat across from me and started with the kind of apology that doesn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. The kind that tries to paint betrayal as confusion and selfishness as loneliness. And I listened to every word, not because I believed her, but because I wanted her to know I heard everything she said. And then I laid it out. The timeline, the messages, the photos, the hotel, the note. Her face changed with every detail, like watching a building collapse in slow motion, each lie crumbling under the weight of facts she never thought I'd collect. She tried to cry, but the tears came too late and with no conviction. And when she asked what this meant for us, I told her calmly that what it meant was simple. She had lost control. I told her I had already spoken with an attorney. I told her the house was in my name because I bought it before we married. I told her the joint accounts were closed and the utilities had been rerouted. The lease on her car was due for renewal, which I wouldn't be co-signing again. And I told her most of all that she was free now to pursue whatever fantasy had pulled her from our marriage and into hotel rooms with men who didn't know how to spell commitment without a prompt. She stared at me like I had spoken a language she had never heard before, and maybe I had, because she had only ever known the version of me that gave and gave and gave until he forgot how to hold anything for himself. But that man was gone. In his place was someone who had learned that being the good guy didn't mean being the doormat. It meant knowing when to walk away. It meant knowing when to stand. And it meant knowing how to leave a door open just wide enough for someone to realize what they'd lost, but never wide enough to let them back in. There's a moment at the end of a storm when the sky doesn't just clear but stretches wide and clean and silent. And I felt that for the first time 2 weeks after she moved out, when I walked into my house and realized it finally felt like mine. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peace. No more half-truths in the air. No more perfume on the pillow that didn't belong to me. No more pretending that love could survive on memory alone. And I realized something then. I wasn't mourning the woman. I was mourning the man I used to be when I still believed she was someone worth building a life around. Her things were gone, but not everything had left with her. A note still sat tucked in the drawer of our old coffee table, and I knew she'd meant for me to find it eventually, maybe after time had passed and the sting had dulled. But I read it the night she dropped off her keys without saying a word. It said she never meant to hurt me. It said she got lost somewhere between who she was and who she thought she was supposed to become. It said she hoped one day I'd remember the good and not just the betrayal. I folded the note and put it back where I found it. Not because I forgave her, but because I didn't need to carry it around anymore. The weight of what she did wasn't mine to drag behind me like a sack of bricks pretending it was a lesson. I had already learned the lesson. That trust, once broken, doesn't repair. It shifts. It grows new roots in harder soil. And maybe that's a good thing because now I understood the value of caution and the power of standing on my own. People asked what happened, and I told them the truth. Not the scandalous version, not the salacious kind, just the kind that says two people grew apart and one of them took the long way out, through another man's arms. And they nodded and offered sympathy, but I didn't need it. What I needed was exactly what I had. A clean slate, a quiet house, and the kind of dignity you only gain when you lose something that never truly saw your worth. She called once. Blocked number, middle of the night. Silence at first, like she was deciding whether her voice still had a place in my ears. When she finally spoke, she asked if I ever thought about what we had. I told her I did. I told her I thought about it often. About how much I gave. About how little she noticed. About how I nearly lost myself trying to keep something alive that she had already buried under lies and lipstick. She didn't reply, didn't cry, didn't beg, just said she was sorry and hung up. And that was the last time we spoke. I still keep the photos in a box. Not because I miss her, but because they remind me that even love can lie if you're not paying attention. And that truth, well, truth always finds a way out, even if it has to burn the whole house down to get there.